across 10,000 star systems, in council chambers where beings of crystalline thought debated with creatures of living plasma. In the deepest reaches of space, where ancient minds computed probabilities across eons, there existed a single word that could silence any conversation, halt any negotiation, and send even the most powerful species scrambling for their defensive positions. That word wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a technology. It wasn't even a threat. It was simpler than that, more terrifying than that. It was human. But how does a species barely 2 centuries into space travel become the nightmare fuel of civilizations that have been exploring the cosmos since before Earth-Sun ignited? How does a race that still fights with chemical propulsion and metal bullets earn a reputation that makes star-devouring entities think twice? The answer lies not in humanity's strength, but in something far more dangerous: their complete inability to recognize when they should give up. This is the story of how that reputation was earned, one impossible victory at a time, until an entire galaxy learned to fear the sound of approaching human laughter in the face of certain death. Ambassador Zeth Kree had seen many species make their debut in the Galactic Council chambers. In his 3 centuries of diplomatic service, he had witnessed the prideful Valorians stride in with their plasma cannons gleaming, the mysterious void dancers phase through walls as if matter was merely a suggestion, and the ancient architects arrive in ships that could reshape reality itself. Each newcomer brought something unique to the galactic community: advanced technology, profound wisdom, or at least an interesting form of exotic matter. The humans brought sandwiches. Captain Sarah Chun stepped through the airlock of the diplomatic station with all the ceremony of someone arriving at a neighborhood barbecue. She carried a thermal bag in one hand and what appeared to be a primitive projectile weapon holstered at her hip. Behind her followed a diverse group that looked like they had been assembled by committee: a tall man with intricate tattoos covering his dark skin, a woman with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a younger man who couldn't seem to stop grinning at everything he saw. The assembled delegates watched with varying degrees of confusion and concern. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy contained within crystalline shells, flickered with what might have been amusement. The hive mind synthesis spoke in their characteristic chorus of overlapping voices. These creatures appear to be casual. Is this their diplomatic protocol? Zeth Kree, whose species had mastered the art of reading micro-expressions across 17 different facial structures, found himself completely baffled by the humans' body language. They seemed simultaneously alert and relaxed, confident yet curious, prepared for either a friendly chat or a firefight. "Welcome to Nexus Station," Zeth Kree announced, his translator converting his chemical emissions into audible speech. "I am Ambassador Zeth Kree of the Galactic Council. We understand your species wishes to establish contact." Captain Chun smiled and set down her thermal bag. "That's right. I'm Sarah Chun, representing Earth and the Sol System. We brought lunch." She gestured to the bag. Figured long diplomatic sessions work better on a full stomach. "Who wants a turkey and Swiss?" The silence stretched for several moments. The Valerian delegate, General Korax, leaned forward with interest. His people respected directness, and there was something refreshingly straightforward about offering food before discussing terms. "You brought sustenance? This is unexpected. Everything's unexpected when you're meeting alien species for the first time." The grinning young man chimed in. "I'm Dr. Vimsvu, xenobiologist. This is incredible. Do you mind if I ask about your respiratory system? The way your vocal cords adapt to different atmospheric compositions is fascinating." The collective flickered again. They had expected many things from first contact: territorial disputes, technology exchanges, philosophical discussions about the nature of consciousness. They had not expected enthusiasm about respiratory biology. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the silver-haired woman, pulled out a tablet and began taking notes. "The gravitational differential here is minimal. Artificial generation, obviously, but the precision is remarkable. Are those quantum stabilizers in the station's core?" Architect Prime designation 7742 rotated its geometric head. Its voice resonated through dimensional frequencies. You recognize our stabilization technology? Basic physics, Vasquez shrugged. Though your implementation is elegant. We've been working on something similar, but our approach is more brute force. Marcus Thompson, the tattooed man, had been quietly observing the various species present. His eyes held the steady gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating threats and opportunities. Nice security setup, he commented to no one in particular. Overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes, defensive positions that can be activated quickly. Professional work. The Valerian general's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. His species had spent eons perfecting the art of warfare, and it was refreshing to meet someone who appreciated good tactical planning. Zethkree tried to regain control of the situation. Perhaps we should discuss the formal protocols for— "Oh, absolutely," Chen interrupted. "But first, does anyone have dietary restrictions? I've got vegetarian options, and Dr. Wu assured me these sandwiches are safe for most carbon-based life forms." She began unpacking containers with the efficiency of someone who had fed large groups under less than ideal circumstances. The delegates exchanged glances. This was not how first contact typically proceeded. The hive mind synthesis spoke first. "Our collective consciousness finds your offer of sustenance intriguing. We shall participate in this lunch ritual." What followed was perhaps the strangest diplomatic session in galactic history. As various species cautiously sampled human food, the conversation meandered through topics ranging from interstellar trade agreements to Dr. Wu's detailed questions about alien biology. The humans seemed genuinely interested in everything, asked practical questions, and showed no signs of the superiority complex that typically marks species upon their first exposure to galactic civilization. "Your technology appears relatively primitive," observed Architect Prime 7742, though there was no malice in the statement. "Your faster-than-light capability is rudimentary, your energy production inefficient, your weapons systems basic projectile and chemical explosive devices." Thompson bit into his sandwich and nodded. "Yep, we make do with what works. Do you not desire to advance? To evolve beyond your current limitations?" Chun wiped mustard from her fingers. "Of course we do. That's why we're here. But we've learned not to abandon something that works just because something shinier comes along. Sometimes the simple solution is the right solution." Dr. Vasquez pulled up holographic displays of human technology. "Our ships might be primitive, but they're reliable. Our weapons might be simple, but they're effective. Our medicine might be crude, but it keeps us alive." She paused, considering. "We're good at making things work, even when they probably shouldn't." The ethereal collective pulsed with something resembling confusion. "Elaborate on this concept." Wu jumped in eagerly. "It's hard to explain to species that evolved with logical progression. Humans have this tendency to take broken things and find ways to make them functional. We call it making do or jerry-rigging or about 50 other phrases depending on where you're from on Earth. Your species regularly operates equipment in a state of partial failure?" the synthesis asked. Thompson laughed. "Half the ships in our fleet are held together with determination and spite. The other half are held together with determination, spite, and duct tape." "What is duct tape?" Shin reached in her pack and pulled out a roll of silver adhesive tape. It's basically our universal solution to problems. If something's broken and duct tape can't fix it, you're not using enough duct tape." The assembled delegates stared at the primitive adhesive with fascination. General Korax leaned forward. "This is your primary repair technology?" "One of them," Vasquez nodded, "along with percussive maintenance, creative rewiring, and the time-honored tradition of hitting things until they work." "Percussive maintenance?" Wu demonstrated by gently tapping his tablet when it flickered. The device immediately stabilized. Sometimes the sophisticated solution is just hitting it in the right spot. The silence that followed was different from before. Where initially the delegates had been confused by human casualness, Now they seemed to be processing something more complex. The idea that an intelligent species would deliberately maintain and operate failing equipment was foreign to every civilization present. Architect Prime 7742 spoke slowly. Your people continue to function despite systematic technological failure. Our people function because of systematic technological failure, Chin corrected. When everything works perfectly, you don't learn to adapt. When nothing works the way it's supposed to, you get creative. Zethkri felt a strange chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. And this adaptability extends to other areas? Thompson's easy smile took on a slightly different quality. Captain, should I tell them about the Sarajevo incident? Chin shook her head. Let's start with something smaller. The Apollo 13 mission. For the next hour, the humans regaled the delegates with stories of missions that succeeded despite catastrophic failures, engineering solutions that violated basic principles of safety and logic, and military operations that achieved victory through sheer bloody-minded refusal to acknowledge defeat. They spoke of submarines held together with hope and wire space missions that landed on the moon despite explosions that should have killed everyone aboard, and soldiers who won battles after running out of ammunition by convincing the enemy they were still armed. With each story, the delegates grew quieter. The Valorians, who prided themselves on military efficiency, struggled to understand tactics that seemed to rely on controlled chaos. The architects, whose technology was perfected over millions of years, couldn't comprehend deliberately using unreliable equipment. The synthesis, which operated through perfect coordination, found the concept of individual initiative during system failure deeply unsettling. Dr. Wu, oblivious to the growing tension, continued cheerfully. Of course, the real fun starts when we run into problems we can't solve with conventional thinking. That's when humans get really creative. Creative how? Zethkri asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know. Vasquez pulled up another display. Well, there was the time we needed to get a message through an enemy jamming field that was blocking all our communications. Standard protocol would be to wait for the jamming to stop or find a way around it. And your solution? Shun grinned. We strapped the message to a brick and threw it through their window. That's literal, but it worked. The point is, when logical solutions fail, we try illogical ones. When safe approaches don't work, we try dangerous ones. When the smart play is blocked, we make the stupid play work. Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying the assembled aliens with the careful eye of someone used to reading rooms. I'm getting the feeling you folks aren't used to that kind of thinking. The collective's light pulsed in what might have been nervousness. Our species value efficiency, logic, predictability. These qualities ensure survival and advancement. Sure, Chin agreed. But what happens when efficiency isn't enough? When logic fails? When predictability becomes a liability? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The delegates realized they didn't have an answer. Their species had achieved greatness through perfecting their strengths, advancing their technology, and eliminating weaknesses. The concept of deliberately maintaining weaknesses, of treating failures as features rather than bugs, was completely alien to their thinking. General Korax spoke slowly. Your species, when faced with insurmountable obstacles, you do not retreat. Retreat's always an option, Thompson said. But it's usually not our first choice. Or second. Or third. What is your first choice? Wu's grin widened. We try something stupid and see if it works. You'd be amazed how often it does. As the diplomatic session drew to a close, formal agreements were made for technological and cultural exchange. Trade routes were established, communication protocols agreed upon, and humanity was welcomed into the galactic community with all the ceremony such occasions demanded. But in private conversations afterward, as the various species compared notes on their new neighbors, a consensus began to emerge. The humans were friendly, intelligent, and technologically competent despite their primitive origins. They would make valuable allies and interesting trading partners. They would also make absolutely terrifying enemies. Not because of their weapons, which were laughably primitive. Not because of their ships, which were barely space-worthy. Not because of their numbers, which were insignificant compared to galactic powers. But because they were the kind of species who would fight a battle with broken weapons, navigate space in failing ships, and face impossible odds with the assumption that they'd figure something out along the way. As Zethkri filed his report on First Contact, he included a personal note that would eventually become part of the official record. Humans represent a unique phenomenon in galactic civilization. They're the only species we have encountered that appears to have evolved assuming that nothing will work correctly and have developed their entire culture around that assumption. This makes them incredibly adaptable, remarkably persistent, and potentially very dangerous to anyone who relies on logical, predictable behavior from their opponents. He paused in his dictation, remembering Captain Chen's casual smile when she talked about throwing bricks through windows to solve communication problems. Recommend we make every effort to keep them as allies. 3 years after First Contact, Ambassador Zethkri wished he had been wrong about humanity being dangerous. The crisis began on a Tuesday, Galactic Standard Time, when long-range sensors detected the approach of a Devourer's fleet. The Devourers were not a species in any conventional sense. They were something far worse, a collective consciousness that consumed entire worlds, breaking down matter into energy to fuel their endless expansion across the galaxy. They had consumed 7 civilizations in the past millennium, each time growing stronger and more terrible. Now they were heading directly toward the Nexus sector, the most densely populated region of galactic space. 30 billion souls across dozens of worlds lay in their path, and the Devourer's fleet was massive beyond anything the galaxy had faced in recorded history. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours. Representatives from across known space gathered in the Great Chamber, their various forms of anxiety creating a symphony of distress calls, chemical emissions, and electromagnetic fluctuations. Fleet Admiral Corax of the Valerian Empire spoke first, his mandibles clicking rapidly with stress. Our military analysis is complete. The Devourer fleet consists of approximately 2,000 vessels, including 37 planet killers and what appears to be a new class of ship we've designated Star Eaters. Our combined forces number fewer than 800 vessels. The ethereal collective's crystalline forms dimmed. Our computational models indicate a success probability of less than 3% for direct military engagement. Architect Prime 9331 projected tactical displays showing the approaching fleet. Evacuation of all worlds in the Nexus sector would require approximately 4 months with our available transport capacity. The Devourers will arrive in 18 days. The Hivemind Synthesis spoke in their overlapping chorus. We concur with the mathematical analysis. Direct confrontation will result in the destruction of both our fleets and the consumed populations we sought to protect. We must consider alternative strategies, such as Zethkri asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Strategic withdrawal, Admiral Corax said quietly. We evacuate what populations we can, establish defensive positions at the outer rim, and attempt to contain the Devourer's expansion after they have finished with the Nexus sector. The chamber fell silent. 30 billion lives written off as an acceptable loss. It was logical, practical, and absolutely sensible given their capabilities. It was also the only choice that offered any hope of galactic civilization survival. That was when Captain Chen's voice cut through the silence. With respect, Admiral, that's bullshit. Every being in the chamber turned toward the human delegation. Captain Chun stood with her arms crossed, her expression carrying the particular mix of annoyance and determination that her allies had learned to recognize as dangerous. Behind her, Dr. Wu was frantically calculating something on his tablet. Dr. Vasquez was pulling up technical specifications, and Marcus Thompson was studying the tactical displays with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Fleet Admiral Corax's translation matrix struggled with the human profanity. I am uncertain of your meaning, Captain. I mean that surrendering 30 billion people without a fight is bullshit, Chen repeated. Maybe it's logical, maybe it's practical, but it's still bullshit. Architect Prime 9331 rotated its geometric head. Do you propose an alternative strategy, Captain Chen? Our analysis indicates. Your analysis indicates you're thinking about this wrong, Dr. Vasquez interrupted, looking up from her tablet. You're treating this like a conventional military engagement. The synthesis spoke in unison. It is a conventional military engagement. Fleet against fleet, superior numbers against inferior numbers. Wu looked up from his calculations, grinning with an expression that made several delegates unconsciously step backward. Not if we don't fight their fleet. Zefkri felt that familiar chill. Explain. Thompson pointed at the tactical display. You're focused on our ships. That's what any sane military would do. Focus on the obvious threat, calculate odds, make rational decisions. And humans would do differently. Chen's smile was sharp enough to cut space-time. Humans would ask what the Devourers are really afraid of. The chamber erupted in confusion. The Devourers were a force of nature, an inexorable tide of consumption. They weren't afraid of anything. That was what made them so terrifying. Wu bounced excitedly in his seat. That's just it. Everyone assumes they're not afraid of anything because they're so powerful. But that's not how evolution works. Everything's afraid of something. You just have to figure out what. Vasquez pulled up new displays showing Devourer behavioral patterns from previous encounters. Look at their attack patterns. Always the same approach. Isolate a system, overwhelm local defenses, begin consumption, move to the next system. It's efficient, logical, predictable. Exactly like our military doctrine, Admiral Korax observed. Right, Chen nodded. But what happens when they encounter something unpredictable? Something that doesn't follow the logical response pattern? The collective flickered uncertainly. They adapt their strategy? Do they? Thompson challenged. Show me one instance where the Devourers changed their fundamental approach. The delegates reviewed historical records. To their surprise, they couldn't find any. Every Devourer attack followed the same pattern, regardless of the defending species' tactics. The Devourers seemed incapable of adapting to unexpected responses. They're not intelligent in the way we think of intelligence, Wu explained. They're more like a sophisticated computer program. They can process information and respond to threats, but only within their program parameters. Architect Prime 9331 processed this information. If accurate, this suggests the Devourers operate under rigid behavioral constraints. But this does not alter our tactical disadvantage. It alters everything, Vasquez said, because it means we don't need to beat them in conventional combat. We just need to make them malfunction. Zethkri's chemical emissions took on notes of confusion and growing alarm. How does one cause a space fleet to malfunction? Shin turned to her team. Marcus, what do you need to make the biggest, dumbest, most obviously suicidal military decision in galactic history? Thompson grinned. Just point me at the target, Captain. Elena, can you make our ships do things they're not supposed to do? Given enough duct tape and willful disregard for safety protocols? Absolutely. James, can you figure out how to make the Devourer's behavioral programming crash? Wu's grin stretched wider. Captain, I thought you'd never ask. The plan that emerged over the next 6 hours was so absurd, so dangerous, and so fundamentally illogical that several delegates suggested the humans had suffered some form of collective mental breakdown. It violated every principle of military strategy, ignored basic physics in several places, and relied on the assumption that the Devourer's programming would fail when faced with sufficiently impossible circumstances. It was, in other words, a perfectly human solution. The plan required every ship in the sector, military and civilian alike. It required modifications that would void warranties across 17 different technology patents. It required coordinated action on a scale never before attempted, with timing measured in microseconds across interstellar distances. Most importantly, it required everyone involved to act in direct contradiction to their survival instincts. You want us to fly our ships directly at the Devourer fleet, Admiral Korak said slowly, broadcast surrender signals, then ram their command vessels at the exact moment they begin their consumption protocol. That's the simple version, Chen nodded. While simultaneously detonating our own power cores, the collective added faintly. Right after we flood local space with false sensor readings indicating the presence of a Class Omega stellar phenomenon, Vasquez confirmed. All of which depends on Dr. Wu's theory that the Devourers will attempt to process contradictory information and crash their collective consciousness, the synthesis said. It's not a theory, Wu protested. It's an educated guess based on xenopsychological principles and the observation that rigid behavioral patterns become vulnerable when faced with paradoxical inputs. The chamber fell silent again. The plan was insane. It was also, several delegates realized with growing horror, just crazy enough that it might work. Architect Prime 9331 spoke carefully. The probability of success for this strategy is impossible to calculate. Exactly, Thompson said with satisfaction. And that's what's going to break their programming. The next 17 days saw the most intensive preparation in galactic history. Ship modifications that should have taken months were completed in days through a combination of round-the-clock work and techniques that Dr. Vasquez cheerfully described as creative safety violations. Civilian vessels were retrofitted with military-grade weapons systems held together with determination and space-grade duct tape. Military ships were modified to broadcast false sensor data while their crews trained for the galaxy's first coordinated kamikaze attack. The human delegation split up to work directly with the various species, and their allies quickly discovered why humanity had earned such a strange reputation in their brief time in galactic society. Dr. Wu worked with the synthesis to develop false sensor data that would convince Devourer ships they were seeing stellar phenomena that couldn't exist. His approach to the problem was to stack impossibilities on top of paradoxes until even he wasn't sure what the readings meant. But that indicates the presence of a black hole, a neutron star, and a quasar in the same location, the synthesis protested. I know, Wu said happily. Isn't it great? There's no way their programming can process that without crashing. Dr. Vasquez worked with the architects to modify their ship's power cores for controlled detonation. Her solution involved bypassing 17 different safety systems and jury-rigging the containment fields to fail in a specific sequence. This modification will destroy the ship, Architect Prime 9331 observed. That's the point, Vasquez replied, elbow deep in quantum field generators. But it'll destroy the ship in exactly the right way at exactly the right time. Probably. Well, I've never tried to make a fusion reactor explode constructively before. Should be interesting. Thompson worked with Admiral Korax to coordinate the attack runs. His approach to military tactics was to take everything the Valorians had learned about warfare and do the opposite. You want our fighters to approach in perfect formation, then scatter randomly while broadcasting surrender signals. Korax asked, right up until the moment we detonate our ships inside their formation. Thompson confirmed. The key is to make them think they've won, then prove them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Captain Chun coordinated with Zeth Kree to synchronize the civilian evacuations with military positioning. Her solution was to use evacuation ships as bait, positioning them exactly where the Devourers would expect easy targets. This puts our most vulnerable ships directly in the line of fire, Zeth Kree pointed out. Right where they'll do the most good, Chun agreed. Because when the Devourers move to consume the evacuation ships, they'll be in perfect position for our ramming attack. The night before the Devourers arrived, the combined fleet held position at the edge of the Nexus sector. 800 ships carrying the hopes of 30 billion souls, preparing to execute a battle plan that no sane species would attempt. Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the assembled fleet. Ships from dozens of different species, their hulls bearing modifications that would have horrified their designers, their crews trained to act against every instinct evolution had given them. Captain, Wu said from his sensor station, Long-range scans show the Devourer fleet dropping out of hyperspace in 30 minutes. All ships report ready, Captain, Thompson added from Tactical, though I use the term ready somewhat loosely. Vasquez looked up from her engineering console. Power core modifications are holding steady. I give them a 60-40 chance of exploding when we want them to instead of right now. Chun opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, this is Captain Chun. In a few minutes, we're going to do something that would get us all court-martialed if we were sane enough to have proper military justice systems. A few chuckles came over the comm from various species that had learned to appreciate human humor. We're going to fly directly at the most dangerous enemy the galaxy has ever seen, and we're going to do it with ships held together by stubbornness and duct tape. We're going to broadcast surrender signals while preparing for ramming attacks. We're going to detonate our own ships and hope the explosions happen at exactly the right time. The comm was silent now. Thousands of beings listening to a human captain prepare them for what might be their final moments. I know this plan sounds crazy. I know it violates everything you've ever learned about survival and military strategy. I know that any reasonable species would retreat and try to live to fight another day. Chun paused, looking out at the stars where the Devourers would soon appear. But we're not being reasonable today. Today, we're being human. And that means when someone threatens our neighbors, our friends, our families, we don't calculate odds. We don't retreat to defensible positions. We don't surrender what we love to save what we can. Her voice carried across the fleet with quiet conviction. Today, we look at impossible odds, and we say, watch this. Today, we show the universe what happens when someone makes the mistake of threatening what humans consider theirs. The Devourer fleet materialized at the edge of the system like a cancer blooming in space. 2,000 ships, each one a monument to the death of worlds, began their inexorable advance toward the Nexus sector. And 800 ships crewed by beings who had learned to think like humans flew directly toward them, broadcasting surrender signals and preparing to demonstrate why an entire galaxy would soon learn to fear that one word. Human. The Battle of Nexus Sector lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. In the annals of galactic history, it would be remembered as the shortest, most decisive, and most impossible military victory ever recorded. It was also the day the word human became synonymous with things are about to get very interesting in ways that violate physics and common sense. The Devourer fleet advanced according to their standard pattern, a coordinated wave designed to overwhelm local defenses before beginning systematic consumption. Their formation was perfect, their approach calculated to minimize resistance while maximizing efficiency. It was exactly what every military computer in the galaxy would have predicted, which was exactly what Dr. Wu had been counting on. Devourer fleet maintaining approach vector, he reported from his sensor station aboard the human flagship Determination. They're completely ignoring our surrender broadcasts. Because they don't understand surrender, Captain Chen replied. To them, resistance ends when the ships stop shooting. The concept of giving up before the shooting starts doesn't compute. Admiral Corax's voice crackled over the comm from his Valerian dreadnought, Honor's Edge. This is highly irregular, Captain Chun. Our ships are approaching attack range while broadcasting surrender signals. I know, Admiral. Feels wrong, doesn't it? That's how we know it's working. The combined fleet continued its approach, 800 ships flying in loose formation toward 2,000 Devourer vessels. To any observer, it looked like the most organized mass suicide in galactic history. The ships were broadcasting surrender on all frequencies while maintaining attack vectors, their crews preparing for ramming speed, while their captains announced their intention to give up. Dr. Vasquez monitored the engineering displays with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb while riding a roller coaster. Power core modifications are stable. All ships report ready for control detonation. And by controlled, I mean barely. Thompson coordinated the attack patterns from tactical. Civilian evacuation ships are in position. The Devourers are reading them as easy targets, moving to intercept exactly where we want them. The Devourer response was predictable and terrible. Their planet-killer ships moved to surround the evacuation vessels, while their main fleet advanced to eliminate the military ships that were, confusingly, both surrendering and attacking simultaneously. Now comes the fun part, Chen announced to the fleet. All ships execute the most irresponsible tactical decision in recorded history. What happened next violated so many principles of military strategy that war colleges across the galaxy would spend decades trying to understand how it worked. The evacuation ships, instead of fleeing or fighting, activated every emergency beacon they carried while broadcasting technical specifications for human food recipes. The Devourer ships moved to consume them, only to discover that the helpless civilian vessels were actually packed with modified mining explosives rigged to detonate when scanned. Simultaneously, the military ships stopped broadcasting surrender signals and started transmitting Dr. Wu's false sensor data. The information stream told the Devourers that local space contained a black hole, 3 neutron stars, a quasar, and a stellar phenomenon that Wu had cheerfully labeled the universe's worst nightmare. The Devourers' collective consciousness attempted to process this information. Their programming insisted that the sensor data was accurate because Devourers were never wrong about celestial phenomena. Their programming also insisted that the sensor data was impossible because black holes and quasars couldn't occupy the same space-time coordinates. For approximately 2.7 seconds, the Devourer fleet's collective consciousness experienced the digital equivalent of a stroke. That was when things got really interesting. The ethereal collective ships, their crystalline hulls modified with human-designed percussive maintenance systems, began ramming Devourer vessels while simultaneously overloading their energy cores. Each impact created a feedback loop that caused the Devourer ship's consumption field to reverse, making them begin consuming themselves. The Architect's vessels, their quantum-perfect engineering deliberately sabotaged by Dr. Vasquez's creative safety violations, approached the Devourer command ships and activated power cores that shouldn't have been able to detonate in such precise sequences. The explosions created gravitational anomalies that convinced nearby Devourer ships they were being attacked by weaponized spacetime. The synthesis coordinated 1,000 individual suicide runs with microsecond precision, their ships creating a pattern of explosions that spelled out mathematical proof that the Devourers didn't exist. The Devourer consciousness, already struggling with paradoxical sensor data, attempted to process this proof and experienced a recursive logic error that propagated through their entire network. And through it all, the human ships did what human ships did best. They improvised. Captain Rodriguez of the transport vessel Nevermore was supposed to detonate her ship near a Devourer planet killer, but her power core failed to activate. Instead of retreating, she rammed the enemy vessel directly into its consumption array, causing it to begin eating its own forward sections. Commander Singh of the corvette Probably Bad Idea found himself surrounded by 6 Devourer fighters, hopelessly outgunned and with no support. Instead of fighting or surrendering, he activated his ship's waste recycling system and began spraying the enemy vessels with sewage, causing their sensors to malfunction and crash into each other. Lieutenant Commander O'Brien of the frigate Reasonable Discussion discovered that her ship's weapons were offline and her engines were failing. Rather than retreat, she activated the ship's coffee machine and began broadcasting human music at maximum volume, causing nearby Devourer ships to experience what could only be described as an allergic reaction to cultural contamination. The battle turned into the kind of chaotic, impossible, utterly improbable series of events that could only happen when humans were involved. Ships held together with duct tape and determination rammed vessels that could destroy planets. Evacuation transports packed with mining explosives took out command ships. Modified civilian vessels created gravitational anomalies using salvage coffee makers and sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept the laws of physics. And through it all, The Devourer fleet's collective consciousness struggled to process information that made no sense according to their programming. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Vessels that had surrendered were attacking. Civilian transports were exploding with the force of military weapons. The laws of physics were being violated in ways their computers couldn't categorize. Dr. Wu watched his sensor displays with the fascination of a scientist observing a beautiful new form of chaos. Captain, the Devourer network is experiencing cascading logic failures. They're trying to process too much contradictory information. How long before complete system failure? Chun asked, dodging debris from a Valerian ship that had just rammed itself through a Devourer dreadnought. Unknown. This is completely unprecedented. We're basically giving their collective consciousness a mental breakdown. That was when the Devourers did something no one expected. They tried to retreat. The ships that could still function began pulling back from the battle, attempting to regroup and reassess the situation. It was the first time in recorded history that Devourers had withdrawn from a battle, and it might have been the end of the engagement. Except that humanity had learned long ago that when someone tries to retreat after threatening your family, you don't let them get away to try again later. All ships, Chun announced, pursue and destroy. No survivors, no retriat, no mercy. The pursuing battle lasted another 8 minutes and covered half the star system. Human and allied ships, many of them barely functional, chased down Devourer vessels that were experiencing systematic programming failures. The Devourers couldn't understand why their enemies kept fighting after sustaining damage that should have destroyed them. They couldn't process why creatures would sacrifice themselves to protect strangers. They couldn't compute why anyone would choose inefficient solutions when logical alternatives existed. Most of all, they couldn't understand why 800 primitive ships were defeating 2,000 advanced vessels through what could only be described as coordinated stupidity. The last Devourer ship was destroyed by a synthesis vessel that had lost everything except life support and artificial gravity. Unable to fight conventionally, the crew had rigged their artificial gravity to create a localized black hole that consumed both ships. When the battle ended, 347 Allied ships remained functional. The rest had been destroyed, consumed, or detonated by their own crews. The Devourer fleet was completely eliminated, their ships either destroyed or suffering such complete system failures that they had begun consuming their own hulls. The casualty reports painted a picture of impossible survival against overwhelming odds. The evacuation ships had successfully protected their civilian passengers despite being used as bait. Military vessels had achieved kill ratios that violated mathematical probability. Most remarkably, several ships that had been completely destroyed were somehow still reporting operational status. How is the reasonable discussion still on our roster? Admiral Korax asked, reviewing the battle reports. Our sensors clearly show it was vaporized 20 minutes ago. Lieutenant Commander O'Brien's voice crackled over the comm. Ship's mostly gone, Admiral, but the coffee maker's still working, and I've still got life support. Figured I'd hang around in case anyone needs backup. It was, the assembled commanders realized, a perfectly human response to being technically dead. The news of a victory spread across the galaxy at faster-than-light speed, carried by automated communication networks that had monitored the battle. Within hours, every species in known space had heard the impossible story. 800 ships had destroyed the largest Devourer fleet in history by using tactics that violated logic, physics, and common sense. More importantly, they had done it by teaching their allies to think like humans. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Military academies across the galaxy demanded complete tactical analyses. Scientists insisted on studying the wreckage to understand how the victory was possible. Diplomatic corps wanted to establish formal alliances with the species that had just demonstrated they could make impossible victories routine. But the real impact was psychological. For the first time in galactic history, an entire civilization had witnessed what happened when someone pushed humanity too far. The reports spread through diplomatic channels, trade networks, and military communications. Each retelling added new details, new impossibilities, new examples of humans achieving victory through methods that shouldn't work. The story of Captain Rodriguez ramming a planet killer with a transport ship became legend. Lieutenant Commander O'Brien's sewage-based fighter tactics were studied in military academies as an example of unconventional resource utilization. Dr. Wu's false sensor data was classified as a new form of electronic warfare that worked by giving enemy computers nervous breakdowns. But it was the human response to impossible odds that truly captured the galactic imagination. Every species had heard the recordings of Captain Shen's final transmission to the fleet. This is Captain Shun to all ships. The enemy is retreating. They came here to consume 30 billion souls, and instead they found 800 ships full of beings who learned to be human for 17 minutes. They learned what it means to look at impossible odds and say, "Watch this." They learned what happens when someone threatens what humans consider theirs. Now, let's teach them what happens when they try to run. Within a month, being human had become galactic slang for attempting impossible solutions to unsolvable problems. Within a year, military tacticians were studying human methods as a formal discipline called asymmetrical logic. Within a decade, the phrase human tactics was synonymous with victory achieved through methods that shouldn't work, but somehow did. The Devourers never returned. Some xenopsychologists theorized that the collective consciousness had suffered permanent damage from trying to process paradoxical information. Others suggested that they had simply learned to avoid sectors where humans might be present. The truth was simpler. The Devourers had run into something their programming couldn't handle. They had encountered a species that treated logic as a suggestion, physics as a guideline, and impossible odds as a personal challenge. They had encountered humanity at its most dangerous, when someone threatened the people humans cared about. 20 years after the Battle of Nexus Sector, Ambassador Zeth Kree published his memoirs. The final chapter was titled "The Day We All Learned to Be Human," and it concluded with an observation that had become the unofficial motto of galactic civilization. When faced with impossible choices, remember that humans don't believe in impossible. They believe in improbable, unlikely, and inadvisable. They believe in solutions that work despite violating every principle of logical thinking. Most importantly, they believe that when someone threatens what you love, you don't calculate odds. You don't retreat to fight another day. You don't surrender what matters to save what you can. You look at the enemy, and you say the one word that has come to strike fear into the hearts of every hostile force in known space. You say human, and then you show them what it means. The word had indeed become a source of fear across the galaxy, but not in the way anyone had expected. It wasn't feared because it meant humanity was coming to conquer or destroy. It was feared because it meant someone had pushed too far, threatened too much, and was about to discover what happened when humans decided that the logical response wasn't good enough. In the end, humanity's reputation wasn't built on their strength or their technology or their numbers. It was built on their complete inability to recognize when they should give up and their absolute refusal to let anyone hurt their friends without consequences. And across the galaxy, in 1,000 different languages and communication forms, beings who had never seen Earth learned to speak one word with a particular mix of admiration, affection, and terror that marked those who had witnessed humanity at its most human. The word that could silence any conversation, halt any negotiation, and send even the most powerful species scrambling for their defensive positions. The word that meant things were about to get very interesting, very dangerous, and very expensive for anyone stupid enough to threaten what humans cared about. The word that had become legend. Human.